We all work.
You don't work.
Oh, yes, I do work.
Yeah, I know your argument on this. Just give it to us. You say I look after my kids. What's wrong with a man looking after his kids other than a woman?
That's correct. What is wrong with a man looking after his children?
Whenever we hear the word parent, we envision a sanctuary of love, care, and unwavering protection for their children. At least, that's what most of us think. Ideally, a home is a haven for the little ones, a place for them to grow, thrive, and feel secure. But that wasn't the case for the 6 innocent victims of the Philpott family tragedy. On May 11th, 2012, 6 children, the youngest of which was 5 years old, lost their lives in the Allenton area of Derby, England, in a gruesome house fire.
The house is on fire, my kids are in bed.
What address?
18 Victory Road, Mrs. Philpott.
Mrs. Philpott. How many kids are in the house, Mrs. Philpott? Where are they?
I'm 6 of them.
Are there any flames there?
Oh my God, please.
And though the case at first seemed to be a devastating accident, it was soon revealed that something far more sinister was afoot. But what was it about this case that made Mick change from a parent devastated by a tragic accident into the man responsible for killing his own children, with Mick Philpott at the center? But before we begin, don't forget to like and subscribe, and don't forget to press the notification button as well, so you're always notified about any new videos I make. So without further ado, let's dive deeper into this harrowing story and find out just how dark the depths of human malice can go. Before we can talk about the case itself, let's take a brief moment to talk about the Philpott family itself. Now, while it's true that every family has its quirks and idiosyncrasies, the Philpott family was especially peculiar. The family itself consisted of 14 people: Mick, or Michael Philpott, Myrede Philpott, Mick's wife, Lisa Willis, Mick's mistress, and 11 kids, none of which were Mick's biological children.
He was very manipulative. He manipulated the benefit system. He manipulated the women. He certainly controlled the women. There was no doubt in my mind about that. What it cannot be blamed for is the deaths of those children. That was due solely to Mick Philpott's wickedness and recklessness. It was not due to the welfare system, and we do need to disentangle the two, or we do ourselves a disservice.
Mick certainly wasn't your average Joe, being a very complex man with a penchant for the finer things in life. He craved attention, he craved the limelight, he loved to be on stage. But where your average Joe works to achieve his dreams, Mick chose a different route. In the years leading to his conviction, Mick had created a fascinating cash cow for himself in the form of gaming the welfare system. Reports estimated that Philpott was using his children to rake in around €60,000 per year from welfare handouts, all while avoiding legitimate employment.
As soon as I started pressing him on work on the morality of deliberately living on everybody else, he started to get very narked indeed.
But even before the Philpott case, he had a long history of run-ins with the law, and his transgressions went beyond mere financial exploitation, with some convictions for attempted assault, bodily harm, and even murder. He had a very controlling and aggressively violent attitude towards women, and had a long history of assault against them. The first of which was back in July 1978, at the age of 21. Mick was charged with the attempted murder of Kim Hill. But this wasn't a simple hit-and-run attempt. This was a planned murder on Mick's part. He stabbed Kim over a dozen times when he found that she was planning to leave him. Fortunately, however, Kim survived, and Mick was sentenced to just 7 years in prison. Thanks to the generous justice system, he was released just after 3 years and 2 months. The jail time, however, had done nothing to rehabilitate Mick, and he was back at it with another woman by the name of Heather Keogh. This case, in particular, highlighted another one of Mick's evils, which was his penchant for younger girls. Heather, who was just 16 at the time, moved in to live with the 37-year-old Mick and had 2 children with him. Although the relationship was fine in the beginning, the downward spiral quickly began when Philpott was accused of assault and bodily harm. Mick was again sent to prison, but was released just a year later. He then met and married 19-year-old Myrede Duffy, and after a year, he also made 16-year-old Lisa Willis his mistress.
He was known to be shameless and very willing to talk openly about it. He was one of the worst examples of abuse that you could find. He had 11 children. They were meal tickets, effectively. He kept a wife and a mistress. He had one child by each every year, pretty well.
For 10 years or so, this household remained without incident. However, this arrangement would soon crumble. In February 2012, Lisa Willis left Mick without notice, taking her children along with her. This was the trigger for the chain reaction of events that led to the tragedy. According to Lisa's sister, after 10 years of putting up with Mick's degeneracy, Lisa had had enough of Mick's abuse. He would beat her, abuse her, and treat her like a slave. And in line with the behavior associated with toxic abusers, Mick would then try sweet-talking her, sometimes cajoling her, or even just outright gaslighting and bullying her. He would alternate between the tactics, depending on his mood at the time. So in February of 2012, Lisa left Mick, taking her children along with her, having spent a decade with Mick. Lisa knew what type of man he was and what he was capable of. She knew what he had done to the women in his past, and she dared not announce her departure. Under the excuse of taking her children out to swim, Lisa took the children and left. Now, being the narcissist that Mick was, he could not stand this supposed jab at his ego. After realizing that Lisa had left, Mick tries to get her back. At first, he resorted to his old tactics of cajoling and sweet-talking, but Lisa wouldn't come back. And why would she? The fact that she managed 10 years is a testament to her willpower. But I digress. Now, obviously, Lisa wasn't coming back. The old tactics weren't working. But Mick was determined to get her back, no matter the cost. And it was this narcissistic desperation that gave rise to the evil plan that would ultimately lead to the death of innocent children. Mick confronted Lisa along with her family in hopes that they would threaten him, and, like flies to honey, they fell right into Mick's trap. After being threatened by Lisa's family, Mick called the police on her, hoping that they would take her into custody, and Mick would, in turn, get the children back. But that didn't work out the way Mick intended to. Now, with another failed plan, Mick was at his wit's end. And thus, in the spring of 2012, after trying every other twisted way to get Lisa to come back had failed, Mick engineered a heinous plan to get back at Lisa for transgressions she had committed against Mick. The wickedness of the plan was such that a mentally sane person couldn't even comprehend. The plan itself was simple, at least the idea of it was. Mick would set fire to his home just before his court date for the children's custody, making it seem like it was Lisa and her family acting on the threat they had given Mick. After lighting the fire, Mick would then play the role of the hero, valiantly going into the burning house and rescuing his children by means of an external ladder. Even here, Mick was thinking for himself and of his desire for publicity, not the poor children that were going to be subjected to this torment. After rescuing the children and subsequently basking in the limelight as the hero of the hour, Mick would then inform the police of this. Lisa would get arrested, and Mick would achieve his goals. So sure was Mick of his plan's success that he even informed his kids' school that they would be returning on Monday. But that was just the idea. The execution would be too difficult for Mick to handle himself. And so he sought the aid of two people close to him, which would also end up being the co-conspirators in this plan. His wife, Myreed, and his friend, Paul Mosley. Let's talk about Myreed first. Myreed Philpott's own story is quite sad in a way. Just like all the other women in Mick's life, Myreed was manipulated to an extent we can never truly know. She was broken to such a degree that she was more of a slave to Mick than a wife. But where others would resist his treatment, Myreed accepted it. Why she would do this is unclear to us. But while what happened to her may be tragic in and of itself, it's no excuse for her role in the whole tragedy. She was not only aware of Mick's plan, she helped him go through with it. The children were her responsibility. I can't even fathom how a mother would be able to put her children in harm's way like that. But she did, and she did so willingly by putting Mick and his obsession with Lisa above her children's safety. Now, a case can be made that Myreed was manipulated into supporting Mick, and that she had no other choice. But the same cannot be said for the second of Mick's accomplices, Paul Mosley. Now Paul was a truly evil man, down to his very soul. Unlike Mick, who had quite the detailed criminal record, Paul was a good citizen on paper. In fact, his first and only run-in with the law before this was in his teens, when he was arrested for robbery. But being a good citizen on paper does not mean he wasn't tainted. Being an adult, Paul knew the risks of this plan. Paul knew that things never go well when fire is involved, but he still chose to help Mick go through with it. In fact, Paul's role in the tragedy was crucial, but we'll come to that later. If you're enjoying the video so far, why not like and subscribe? For now, let's move to the execution of the case, and what it truly resulted in.
Mick Philpott made a frantic emergency call,
I can't get them back in the kitchen.
but the blaze was bigger than planned and burned out of control.
On May 11, 2012, while the children were sleeping, Paul, Mick, and Myreed put their plan into motion. Paul would pour petrol in the house, starting the fire. The petrol trail would begin from the letterbox of the Philpott's residence, making it seem like the fire was deliberate and not an accident. This would be done to frame Lisa and her family. After the fire, Mick called the police, feigning panic and informing them of the fire, and then moving to the second step of the plan, which is to use an external ladder to rescue the children. Things, however, wouldn't go according to plan. As is the nature of fire, it already spreads quickly, but for some reason Mick had chosen to include fuel additives to the fire, which made the fire spread much quicker. As the fire spread and smoke began to rise, Mick wasn't able to go through with the dramatic rescue, and this carefully orchestrated scheme would quickly spiral out of control, morphing into a nightmare. The intense heat and thick smoke made it impossible for anyone to rescue the children, let alone the three criminals who had planned to be the heroes of the media that day. Seeing Mick's inability to rescue the children, the mother in Myreed would finally wake up, and she desperately called the police for help.
My house is on fire. My kids are in bed.
Yes, what address?
18 Victory Road. Mrs. Philpott.
Mrs. Philpott. I my kids are in the house, Mrs. Philpott. Where are they?
I'm sick of them.
Are there any flames there?
Oh my God, please.
And though help did arrive in the form of firefighters, even they were unable to save the children as the fire had spread too much, making it impossible to enter the house. Even the neighbors had tried to help, risking their own safety in the process, but their bravery wasn't enough to combat the Philpott's stupidity. Engulfed in fire and smoke, the 6 children trapped inside would lose their lives on the spot. All 6 of them would pass away painlessly due to smoke-induced asphyxiation.
They were found still lying in their beds, overcome by smoke. 6 young lives cut short. Their home blackened by the blaze. It was described in court as a plan that went tragically wrong.
The children, between 5 and 13 years old, were buried in 6 small caskets last May.
According to Lisa and Myreed, Mick was a good father to his children, but seeing his actions, we can't help but doubt that statement. As the kids lost their lives, Mick would end up getting exactly what he desired. According to Mick's neighbors, instead of acting like a man that had just lost 6 children, he was surprisingly calm. And he had immediately begun spreading lies about Lisa and her family mere minutes after the fire, claiming that they were behind this all. This would get Lisa arrested, and as Mick had planned, the children were given to him. Of course, she had nothing to do with the fire, and neither did Adam Taylor, who was also falsely accused of the fire. The authorities, of course, were oblivious to the secret behind this tragedy. They were as unaware of the Philpott's evil as were the rest of their neighbors. But evil can't hide forever, and the truth would soon surface. In the time after the fire, Mick and Myreed would go on to get a lot of sympathy for their loss. They would make several public appearances and feign being devastated. Obviously, it was a tragic scene. A couple that had just lost 6 children, a crying mother, a father mourning the loss of his own. The sight was painful, enough to move everyone. Even the media saw the Philpotts as bereaved parents who had gone through such immeasurable tragedy. Fundraisers were created to support the family. Vigils were made. But this charade wouldn't last long. The police already had doubts about Mick, but what tipped the scales and forced the police to do an investigation was a press conference that Mick and Myreed appeared in. According to Steve Cotterill, the chief constable of Derbyshire Police at the time, there was nothing about Mick that showed that he had suffered such an unfathomable loss. In the words of Cotterill, the whole crying was a sham. The tissue Mick used to dab away his tears didn't even get wet. And sure, some people don't cry, even in extreme grief. But there were other signs of it being a sham. One of which was that Mick's forehead wrinkles didn't change. Instead, they were completely static. According to Robert Phipps, an expert in criminal body language, the forehead wrinkles change when expressing intense emotions. This was evident with Myreed, sitting right beside Mick, Her forehead and eyebrows expressed her sorrow, and her grief was true. After this performance, the police were on to Mick, and thus planted a bug in his hotel room. Before, there were only suspicions and rumors, and solid proof was needed. And almost as if it were cosmic justice, Mick snitched on himself. After listening to the tapes containing Mick and Myreed's conversations, the truth quickly surfaced. The tapes revealed that the whole thing was a sham.
Let's tell me the story. What? No, something. Have they got any evidence on you? They've got nothing on me. Nothing.
The tears, the crying, everything. Even Myreed's tearful call with the authorities was fake.
What you crying when you were saying it? How bad?
Not really bad, but I did cry.
Further investigations also showed that the fire had multiple points of origin instead of one, as is the case with accidental fires, and several other key pieces of evidence also began to emerge. Petrol was discovered on Mick and Paul's clothes, and the heroic rescue he had portrayed was in reality a lazy and delayed attempt, according to Mick's neighbors, not to mention the inconsistencies in the statements by both Mick and Myreed. All these reasons combined with the police finding out about Mick's manipulative past, the Philpotts and Paul Mosley were quickly arrested on the suspicion of murder. The jury would go on to find Mick, Myreed, and Paul guilty of manslaughter, with Mick being sentenced to life with a minimum term of 15 years, Myreed being sentenced to 17 years, and Paul also receiving a 17-year sentence. Mick Philpott's case is an extremely jarring example of how twisted human malice can be, and thus we come to an end.
I'm pleased justice has been achieved for the 6 children who died in this fire, but I have to say that I derive no pleasure from the conviction of Mick and Myreed Philpott and Paul Mosley. This has been a shocking case for everyone involved. 6 young children lost their lives needlessly in a fire, and all our efforts have been focused on getting justice for those children.
If you enjoyed the video and would like to support us, please like and subscribe. And be sure to hit the bell icon too to get notified of all the latest videos releasing. As always, I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.